The ground is frozen solid. You can feel every crack in the earth pushing up through the soles of your bare feet like splinters of ice. The sky hasn't decided whether to stay dark or turn light. It's that strange, breathless moment just before dawn, when the world holds perfectly still, and the only sound is the white cloud of your own breath dissolving into cold air. Your stomach stopped hurting 2 hours ago. That's how you know it's serious. Hunger doesn't always scream. Sometimes it goes quiet. And that silence is the most terrifying thing you've ever felt. Behind you, inside the shelter, your family is still sleeping. Your children, your mother, they haven't eaten anything real in 2 days. And they won't say a word about it, because in this world, complaining about hunger is a luxury no one can afford. Everything, every single thing that happens today, depends on what you do in the next few hours. No second chances, no backup plan, no way to fail quietly. Now here is what most people never stop to think about. The man standing in that frozen clearing. He has no rifle, no steel trap, no compass, no map drawn by someone who came before him. He has 2 hands, a body that has been trained since childhood to read wind and shadow and silence, and a small collection of tools so simple, they could be made from materials found within walking distance of where he stands. And yet, with those tools, he is about to do something that modern engineers, when they finally studied it closely, called nothing short of genius. These were not primitive people fumbling through survival. These were problem solvers, operating at the absolute edge of human capability, generation after generation, refining solutions so elegant that some of them still cannot be improved upon today. 10,000 years of trial and failure and quiet brilliance, compressed into the things a single hunter carries in his hands on a frozen morning. Welcome to Primal Echoes, where we go back to the moments before convenience existed, before technology gave us shortcuts, and we ask the question that actually matters. What does a human being look like when there is nothing between them and the wild except their own intelligence? If that question pulls at something in you, you are exactly where you belong. Today we are looking at 10 hunting tools developed by Native American peoples. Tools so ingeniously designed that each one tells a story not just about survival, but about how deeply these hunters understood the world around them. Some of these you think you know, some will genuinely stop you cold. And one of them, tool number 4, was so silent, so fast, so precisely lethal that the first Europeans who witnessed it in the jungle refused to write it down as a weapon. They wrote it down as witchcraft. By the time we get there, you will understand exactly why they had no other words for it. Stay with us, because what's coming next will change the way you see human ingenuity forever. What if the most elegant weapon ever made had no blade at all? No edge to sharpen, no metal to forge. Nothing that would look dangerous sitting on a table in front of you. Just stones, just cord, just the invisible force that exists between a spinning weight and the physics of the world it moves through. That is the bola, and the moment you understand how it works, you will never look at simplicity the same way again. The design is almost insultingly straightforward. 2 or more smooth, rounded stones, each tied to the end of a cord, with all the cords meeting at a central knot. The hunter grips that knot, swings the weights overhead until they begin to whistle, and you can actually hear it, a low hum that builds as the speed increases, and then releases. The stones fly outward in a wide arc, the cords spreading as they travel, and when they reach the animal, they don't just strike it, they wrap around it. Legs, wings, neck, whatever they find, they tangle, and the animal goes down. The Mapuche and Tehuelche peoples of South America used the bola to take down guanaco, rhea, and even horses after Europeans introduced them to the continent. On the open plains, where an animal can reach full speed and disappear in seconds, the bola gave hunters a reach that no thrown rock or short-range weapon could match. But here is what most people don't appreciate about the bola: the years that went into each throw. Children were given small practice versions and spent hours launching them at wooden stakes driven into the ground, learning how weight and cord length and release angle change everything about where the weapon lands. Each stone was not just picked up off the ground. It was selected, held in the palm, tested for balance, smoothed by hand. Because every stone in that bola was a promise. A promise to the family waiting back at camp that the hunter had done everything within his power to come home with food. That kind of weight, the invisible kind, was carried alongside the physical one. And if you think that level of elegance is something, wait until you hear what these hunters invented for the open ocean, because that is where things get truly extraordinary. The ocean gives nothing. It takes ships, lives, seasons, and it gives nothing back unless you have figured out exactly how to ask. The harpoon was that question, and for the Inuit and coastal peoples of the Arctic, it was the only question that mattered. A traditional harpoon looks simple enough: a long throwing shaft, a sharpened head, and a line connecting the two. But the genius of it lives in one small, almost invisible detail. The head is designed to detach on impact and then rotate. When the point enters the animal's body and the hunter pulls back on the line, the head turns sideways inside the flesh, locking itself in place like an anchor dropping into the seafloor. There is no pulling it out, there is no getting away. A seal, a walrus, a whale, once the toggling harpoon head sets, the animal belongs to the hunter, no matter how deep it dives or how hard it fights. Think about what that means in practice. A single bowhead whale, successfully harpooned and brought ashore, could provide enough meat, fat, oil, and bone to sustain an entire Arctic community through 4 months of winter darkness. One animal, one weapon, dozens of lives. The stakes were not abstract, they were absolute. And so the harpoon was never treated as just a tool. Before a hunt, it was blessed. The lines, braided from sinew or seal gut by the women of the community, a process that took days of careful, patient work, were as much a part of the weapon as the point itself. The whole community, in a very real sense, went into the water together every time that harpoon left a hunter's hand. But harpoons ruled the water. On land, in the forests and the open plains, a completely different principle took over, and the weapon that carried it became one of the most recognized silhouettes in all of human history. Every culture on Earth, given enough time, eventually figures out the wheel. It is a solution so logical that history finds it independently, over and over, across continents that never spoke to each other. But not every culture invented the sinew-backed bow. That took something more, a specific and profound understanding of how materials store and release energy, applied with a level of patience that most people alive today would find almost unimaginable. The back of a well-made plains bow was layered with strips of animal tendon, soaked until soft, and then pressed onto the wood and allowed to dry under tension. Tendon resists stretching. It wants to return to its original shape with tremendous force. When you combine that with a wood core that bends under compression, what you get is a bow that stores nearly twice the energy of a simple wooden stave and releases it in a fraction of a second. Arrowheads napped from obsidian, the volcanic glass found across the American West, were ground and flaked to edges that a modern surgical scalpel cannot match under a microscope. These were not rough tools, they were precision instruments. Plains tribes built short, compact bows for use on horseback, where a full draw from a galloping animal required something that could be handled in one hand. Woodland tribes favored longer bows for open-range accuracy. Arctic hunters adapted the design for fishing, attaching lines to barbed arrows and firing into shallow water. One fundamental design, reshaped by every environment it entered, refined by every generation that carried it. And here is the detail that quietly says everything. When European traders arrived with rifles, many Native American hunters looked at the gun, understood exactly what it was, and chose to keep their bows. Not out of stubbornness, not out of ignorance, but because a bow does not misfire in rain. It does not jam. It does not run out of powder. It does not depend on a supply chain that could be cut off. A bow, made by hands that understood it completely, never betrayed the person who knew it. 3 tools down, 7 to go. And everything up to this point has been the part of the story people already suspect. What's coming next is the part that genuinely stops people cold. Here it is. The weapon European explorers wrote down as witchcraft. The one we promised you at the beginning. And now that you understand the bola, the harpoon, and the bow, now that you have a sense of what these hunters were capable of, you are actually ready to appreciate what the blowgun really is. Because on the surface, it sounds almost too simple to be serious. A tube, a dart, a breath. That's it. But in the jungle, simplicity is not a weakness. In the jungle, the loudest hunter always goes hungry. Sound travels differently under a dense canopy. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves, every sound that does not belong to the forest announces your presence to every animal within range and empties the trees around you in seconds. The blowgun solved that problem completely. The weapon itself was a tube, sometimes over 7 feet long, hollowed from a straight section of palm or hardwood, with a bore so clean and consistent that even a slight curve anywhere along its length would ruin the accuracy of every shot fired through it. The dart was thin, light, no longer than your hand, with soft plant fiber wrapped around the base to create a seal against the inside of the tube. One sharp breath, not a blow, not a burst of force, but a precise, controlled exhale from deep in the diaphragm, and the dart was gone, silent, invisible, already arriving before the animal knew anything had happened. But the dart alone was not the revolution. The revolution was what was on the tip of it: curare, a poison extracted from specific jungle plants through a preparation process so complex, so chemically precise, that scientists studying it in the 20th century were genuinely astonished that anyone had figured it out without a laboratory. Curare causes rapid paralysis by blocking the signals between nerves and muscles. A bird struck by a curare dart does not thrash and flee. It simply stops and falls and can be retrieved without damage. And here is the detail that still surprises people. Curare breaks down completely when exposed to heat. The meat is entirely safe to eat once cooked. These hunters had effectively invented targeted pharmacology 2,000 years before the word pharmacology existed. It took years to master, not weeks, not months. A young hunter spent up to 2 years learning nothing but breath control, how to load, aim, and exhale in one fluid motion without a single wasted movement, without a single sound. In the hands of someone who had done that work, the blowgun was not a crude weapon. It was a precise instrument of mercy. Fast, silent. The animal felt nothing. No fear, no pain, no awareness of what had happened. In a tradition that held deep respect for the animals it depended on, that mattered. The kill was not an act of violence. It was a transition, handled with as much care and as little suffering as the hunter could provide. But what if you didn't want to kill at all? What if you needed the animal alive, or at least undamaged? What if the feathers mattered as much as the meat? That question leads us to one of the most overlooked inventions in the entire history of hunting. This is the answer: the pellet bow. And if you have never heard of it, you are not alone, because it sits so far outside the usual conversation about Native American tools that most people don't even know it existed. Unlike a standard bow that fires an arrow, the pellet bow had 2 parallel strings joined together, forming a small cradle between them. Into that cradle, the hunter placed a ball of hardened clay or a smooth stone. When drawn and released, the pellet launched forward with enough speed to stun a bird cleanly, but not enough to pierce it, not enough to ruin the feathers, not enough to damage the body in any way that would reduce its usefulness. Because these hunters understood something that a purely modern mindset struggles to fully absorb. Feathers were not decoration. Feathers were fletching. Fletching meant arrows. Arrows meant food. Every single component of every animal had a role in the system, and wasting any part of it was not just inefficient. It was a failure of understanding. Feathers for arrows. Arrows for food. Food for survival. Everything connected. Everything purposeful. Nothing discarded. That philosophy did not stop at the forest's edge. It extended all the way to the water, and the ice above it, standing motionless for 3 hours in 30 below zero. Not because the cold forced stillness upon you. Not because movement was impossible. Because stillness was the choice. The deliberate, disciplined, practiced choice of a hunter who understood that the fish moving beneath the ice had no idea a human being existed above it, and that the moment that changed, the opportunity was gone. The kakivak, the Inuit fishing spear, was built specifically for this kind of precision. Its head carried multiple prongs that curved slightly backward, so that the moment a fish was struck and tried to pull free, the barbs set deeper rather than releasing. There was no second chance, no way to reposition, no way to compensate for a bad throw. The spear either found its mark in the fraction of a second the fish crossed the hole in the ice, or it didn't. And if it didn't, the hunter waited, quietly, without complaint, without the thought that waiting was wasted time, because in this world, patience was not the absence of action. It was the most important action available. Before the first spear ever entered the water, many Inuit hunters offered a quiet acknowledgement to the water itself. Not a prayer in the way a modern audience might imagine it, but something closer to a statement of awareness. I know what I am taking. I know what it costs. I am not taking it carelessly. That was not superstition. That was the oldest form of environmental accountability human beings ever practiced. They had conquered the land. They had conquered the frozen sea. But could they conquer the sky itself? That answer is coming, and it is exactly as extraordinary as you would expect. Yes, they did. The sky was not beyond them. Nothing was beyond them. And the Kumutite, the Bird Bola developed by the Inuit, is the proof. Thousands of birds, one throw, zero waste. That is not an exaggeration. That is exactly what happened during the great seasonal migrations, when enormous flocks moved overhead, in formations so dense they could darken the sky for minutes at a time. The Inuit had watched these migrations for generations. They understood the routes, the altitudes, the timing, the way a flock banks and tightens when it senses open air versus when it loosens over land. That knowledge was not written down anywhere. It lived in the bodies and memories of hunters who had stood in the same places their fathers and grandfathers had stood, watching the same sky, learning to read it the way a modern navigator reads a chart. The Kumutite itself was a lighter version of the Bola. 3 small stones, attached to thin cords, built to fly upward rather than outward, designed not to kill with impact, but to tangle. When thrown into the heart of a passing flock at exactly the right moment, the cords spun through the air and caught around wings, and birds came down in groups rather than one at a time. The meat fed the community. The fat went into lamps that burned through the dark Arctic winter. The feathers insulated clothing that meant the difference between surviving a blizzard and disappearing into one. In a single throw, at the right moment, the sky became a storehouse. And standing there watching it happen, watching the ancient calculation of wind and timing and accumulated knowledge produce that result, you would understand, in a way that no explanation can fully capture, what it actually means for a human being to be in complete harmony with the natural world around them. That moment of mastery is one of the most quietly profound things our species has ever accomplished. But mastery of the hunt was only part of what made these people extraordinary. What they did after the hunt, how they processed, preserved, and used everything the animal gave them, required tools just as ingenious as the weapons themselves. The Ulu Knife has been called the Swiss Army knife of the ancient world, except that description sells it short, because the Swiss Army knife was invented roughly 5,000 years after the Ulu had already been perfected. The design is immediately recognizable once you have seen it. A semicircular blade, wide and curved, with a handle mounted directly above the center of the arc. That geometry is not decorative, it is physics. When you press down on a handle positioned above the blade's curve and rock it forward, the leverage you generate is dramatically greater than what a straight-bladed knife of the same size could produce. It made scraping the fat and flesh from a hide, a task that could take hours with the wrong tool, efficient enough to be practical, in conditions where time and warmth were both running out. The Ulu cut meat, scraped hides clean, trimmed sinew, shaped blocks of snow for igloo construction, and fit into one hand well enough to be used in heavy mittens, in temperatures where exposed skin freezes in minutes. But the detail about the Ulu that stays with you is not the engineering. It is this. These knives were not replaced when they wore down. They were resharpened, rehandled, and passed from mother to daughter across generations. Not because new materials were unavailable. Because the knife carried something that new materials could not provide. The presence of the hands that had used it before. To hold your grandmother's Ulu was to hold her knowledge, her patience, her way of moving through the world. Losing a knife was not just losing a tool, it was losing a connection. That understanding, that objects can carry meaning beyond their function, is something the modern world spends a great deal of time trying to recover. These people never lost it. And neither did the hunters who carried the weapon that, of all the tools on this list, reaches furthest back into the human story. 13,000 years ago, someone sat down with a piece of flint, a piece of antler, and 3 days of uninterrupted focus, and made something so precisely engineered that researchers studying it with modern instruments still argue about exactly how it was done. The Clovis Point. A projectile tip fluted, meaning a long, thin channel was carefully removed from each face of the base, in a way that allowed it to be mounted onto a wooden shaft with a stability and shock absorption that no unfluted point could match. When a Clovis-tipped spear struck a mammoth moving at speed, the point did not shatter from the impact. It held. And the hunters who made these points were using them across an area stretching from what is now Canada all the way down to Mexico. The same fundamental design, the same fluting technique, spread across an entire continent. One idea, one solution, adopted everywhere it reached because it simply worked better than anything that came before it. And then the mammoths disappeared. The great herds thinned, the megafauna that had defined the hunting landscape for millennia were gone, and the Clovis Point quietly gave way to something smaller, lighter, and more precisely balanced for the animals that remained. The Folsom Point, adapted, refined, still deadly, still brilliant, but reshaped by a world that had changed. That is not a story of failure. That is the oldest example of human adaptability we have ever found. A culture that looked at a transformed world and said, quietly and without drama, we will change with it. And then there is the last tool on this list. The one that looks the most modest, costs the least to make, requires the most time to master, and in many ways, says everything there is to say about how these hunters understood the relationship between effort and skill. Free ammunition, unlimited range. And it takes 10 years to truly master. The sling, a strip of leather or braided fiber with a small pouch at its center, was the first hunting tool many young boys in a number of Native American traditions ever held. Not because it was the easiest to learn, because it was the hardest. A smooth stone placed in the pouch, the sling swung in a circle overhead, building speed with each revolution, and then released at precisely the right moment to send that stone toward a target over 100 yards away with enough force to kill cleanly. Beginners missed constantly. That was expected. That was the point. The sling taught patience. It taught the ability to fail, to reset, and to try again, without frustration distorting the movement. It taught young hunters that skill is not given. It is built, layer by layer, through repetition and attention and time. And years later, when those same hunters stood with a bow, or a harpoon, or a bola overhead in the frozen morning air, they already knew in their hands and their bodies what accuracy felt like. They had earned it the hard way. The only way it lasts. Remember the man we started with, barefoot on frozen ground before the sun came up, stomach empty, family waiting. No rifle, no map, no safety net. He didn't need any of it. What he carried was not just a collection of tools. It was 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge, tested against every environment this continent holds, refined by every generation that survived long enough to pass it forward, and compressed into the things he could carry in 2 hands on a cold morning. And with those things, he was not struggling. He was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he had been prepared to do. That is not a story about the past. That is a story about what human beings are capable of when they stop depending on shortcuts and start truly understanding the world they live in. Every tool we looked at today was built from almost nothing. Stone, bone, sinew, wood, plant fiber. Things you could find within walking distance of wherever you stood. And yet every single one of them solved a problem so completely, so elegantly, that engineers and anthropologists studying them centuries later still find details worth writing papers about. That gap between the simplicity of the materials and the sophistication of the result is where the real lesson lives, because these tools were never just physics. They were philosophy, made physical. Take only what you need. Use everything you are given. Acknowledge what the world sacrifices so that you can continue to exist within it. That was not a slogan. That was a daily practice, built into the design of every weapon, every throw, every quiet moment of patience on a frozen riverbank before the first light of morning. We live now in a world that has solved almost every problem these hunters faced. We have warmth on demand, food available at any hour, weapons so powerful that skill has become almost optional. And somehow, with all of that, something has been lost that is genuinely difficult to name. These people knew what they depended on. They knew it the way you know your own heartbeat. Not because they thought about it, but because forgetting it for a single day had consequences that were immediate and real. True intelligence, it turns out, is not measured by how much you can access. It is measured by how deeply you understand what you actually need, and how little you waste in the process of getting it. The ancient world did not have more than us. It understood more than us, and that difference is worth sitting with. So tell us, which of these tools stopped you in your tracks? Was it the bola, spinning through open air with nothing but cord and stone and centuries of refinement behind it? Was it the silence of the blowgun, the dart already arriving before the jungle knew it had been fired? Or was it the Clovis Point, 13,000 years old, made by hands we will never know, built to bring down animals that no longer exist, and still precise enough that modern science cannot fully explain how it was made? Whatever it was, leave it in the comments below, because these conversations matter, and we read every one of them. This is Primal Echoes. We don't just study the past, we listen to it, because the ancient world is not finished speaking, and the modern world has not yet finished learning. If this video gave you something to think about, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes that older always means simpler. We will keep going deeper together. And next time on Primal Echoes, the Vikings. A people so adapted to cold, so ruthlessly ingenious about surviving winters that would kill an unprepared army in days, that the way they built their homes, their ships, and their heating systems is still influencing architecture and engineering today. How do you survive in darkness and ice for 6 months, with no electricity, no insulation as we know it, and no option to leave? The answer will genuinely change the way you look at the walls around you. We will see you there.